Next we have Andrew Stewart, who is a farmer and also very involved in land care and agroforestry. In the middle we have Ed Charles, who's a food blogger and writer. Next, Lizette, Snaith, who is a farmer and owner of Warialda belted Galloways, which sells beef directly through farmers markets. And finally we have Callam Reeves, who is the big boss and cider maker of Golden Axe Cider, a boutique cider brand. So I'm just going to start with a few questions. Andrew, I'll start with you. What is a key message you want to tell consumers about how you run your farm?
Well, the key message is that we're running a sustainable farm which reduces carbon neutral lands, and we do that with the integration of multi-purpose revegetation for the property. When the property was run many years ago, ran down its natural resource base with erosion, sneaking, waterlogging and exposure, lack of biodiversity and so on. So we took the view that we needed to improve the natural resource base, and land care was very prominent then. Going back about 20 years ago, we started the program. So we did a whole farm plan, and we've been revegetating the waterways, the drainage lines, addressing the salinity, the waterlogging, looking at fencing out the remnant vegetation, and also linking those trees and plantings into a complex web of trees, like a sort of a biological infrastructure to protect the farm. So we now have a 23-kilometre interface of plantation to pasture over the 600-acre farm, and so that gives us good protection. But the other opportunity we took was to integrate agroforestry into that program. So we thought, we're going to do this, put all this infrastructure there, why not put some commercial trees there which we might be able to derive some products from, such as saw logs and tree seeds, and even integrating bush tuckers and cut flowers and things like that. So an integrated approach. So pretty much it's about looking after the environment, protecting the livestock, and having a sustainable product. So the message we try to get across is that you can have a clean green production system which can support the agriculture and not replace the agriculture if it's integrated in an appropriate way.
Thanks, Andrew. That's a great example of some really good news stories that might not often get out there beyond the agriculture community. Callam, as someone who sources raw products and also sells a product to consumers, is that the type of messages that you yourself are interested in branding your product?
We are very keen on sourcing locally as much as possible. So certainly Victorian in terms of the apples that we get, and juicing, keeping everything as close to home as possible to keep the food miles down, as well as the carbon footprint, and just to support local communities. What was your other question?
So when you're selling your product to consumers as well, is that the type of messages you flow through from the producers that you source from?
We definitely tell that story when we're talking to consumers. I'm not entirely sure how much that means to consumers at the moment, sourcing locally, and that is a part of that's something that we did that because it was a philosophy of ours, but then communicating that to people in terms of how that impacts on their hip pocket and that sort of thing is a little bit of it's a difficult thing, because people you can tell people, we don't use fruit concentrate, or we don't use any sugar, or we don't import the fruit for our product, but a lot of the time it's the hip pocket that kind of directs people. So we do communicate that message as well as a lot of other different messages about what we do. But yeah, it's what is most important to the consumer is really what they're going to hear. So that's probably something that we could be talking about.
Thanks, Callam. And to lead on from that, Ed, as a food writer who reaches a lot of consumers, is it your experience that consumers are interested in the kind of messages that Andrew was talking about, or do you feel, like Callam suggested, that consumers don't really know what they want or what they want to hear?
I should say that, first of all, because of the way newspapers are going, I'm evolved from a food writer, and now I actually really just advise on marketing digitally to lots of restaurants, hospitality businesses, and even butchers and things. And I think the first thing we did, as a writer, you'd always look at is what does the consumer want to know. Now, because there's a lot of publicity around authenticity and sort of rare breed pigs or small producers like Lizette, who's at farmers markets, and that's one end of the market. But it's a very expensive end of the market, a very niche end of the market. It's like if you looked at if you sold wine or you sold beer, some people want to buy VB because it's cheap, and some people want to spend a lot of money. And so not everybody can afford, say, the $30 organic chicken. Not everybody, the single mums and dads in this world, can afford to go out and spend $10 to $12 on a dozen eggs. And so I think the trends I see in marketing and on the internet and what writers want to see, they want to see transparency and honesty more than anything else. So if you went into Coles or to Safeway or Woolworths and you see eggs, for instance, it's incredibly confusing, and there's a lot of divisiveness in the messages that people put out there about milk, or whether there's permeating milk, which isn't really a problem. With eggs, I actually personally, I prefer not to buy, say, cage eggs, but I actually like the honesty of a supplier that says we just do cage eggs. And some people want to make that choice and buy a dozen cheap eggs because they haven't got the money to buy a dozen expensive eggs. It's a difference between, what's it, $12 and probably $5. The same for chickens, if you've been in these 50, my girlfriend used to collect eggs in a chicken farm on kibbutz, and it's the suffering we read about in some of the left or right-wing papers sometimes isn't as bad as it's made out. So I think it's knowing your market and your product and where you're taking it and being honest about it. And if you're not honest about it, and if your animal husbandry isn't good on that side, or your environmental credentials aren't good and you're lying about it, that's when you're going to get caught out. It's honesty and transparency.
Thanks, Ed. That will lead great into my next question, which was directed at Wayne and Lizette. So you guys have both had really successful examples of how you've managed to close the relationship with consumers. What have you seen as some of the benefits for your business to that? We might start with you, Wayne.
Yeah, well, I guess I'd probably say that a paddock to plate concept is not easy, so it's not for everybody. And I guess we've been going now for 3 years, and this year we're starting to really see, I suppose, kick some goals and see some benefit of what we've done. But certainly the first 12 months was a lot of hard work. We're doing a lot of farmer markets. And I think the other thing is you need to actually identify where do you see your business going in sort of a few years' time. Do you just want to take the produce that you're producing on your farm and sell it at farmer markets? Do you want to get some duplication of your time and sell it in shops? And so you need to really identify that sort of an issue. And I think that's what we've tried to do. We've got probably about 800 customers now in Victoria. And I suppose the really important thing, I think, to consumers is that they feel part of what you're doing. And we're coming up against $1 a litre milk as soon as we started. And that was probably the greatest thing for us that could have happened. Because it really separated people. It separated, there is a whole lot of people out there that really want good quality milk or good quality produce. And perhaps they've got the kids off their hands, they're happy to pay that money. The thing we also found that we always thought people in Melbourne perhaps weren't that interested in where their food came from. And that was quite the contrary. And that was the terrific thing about the farmer markets, was you get face to face with people and you can get to explain, and they're very keen to find out more about your product. So I think if you're going down that track, you need to also identify what are your weaknesses and what are your strengths. And I suppose we feel like that we're reasonable marketers, probably not such good processors, and so we've actually got the processing contracted out. So I think you need to concentrate on what are your strengths and then bring people around you to I suppose, bolster that up. But yeah, and I suppose the thing that we've also found in Melbourne is that I tend to think that they've probably got a fairly plastic existence, and they really like the idea of talking to a farmer about their food and where it's coming from. And the other thing is, I suppose, the older generation, probably my generation, all had somebody that, an uncle that had a farm, and they used to go to the farm, and like the number of stories we hear about people scooping the milk off the top of the vat and getting all the cream and stuff like that, but they relate to that. But the next generation, they haven't got those people on the farms, and so they really don't know anything about it. And we found that a lot of people just thought we milked the cows once a day and had the weekends off, you know, and it's just amazing. Yeah. So, yeah. That's probably the experience that we've had.
And Lizette, have you found too that your consumers are really interested in how you can use your product and trying to get that connection through you back to food production?
I guess for us, I call us micro producers. We don't have thousands of head of cattle. We process 3 to 4 carcasses a week, which is tiny. And most people say you can't make a living out of that. And I'm here to tell you that you can. It's not a very glamorous life, and it's a lot of work. But I think our customers want to buy from us because there's a whole lot of reasons, I think. We're grass-fed, we know our animals, we handle them, we take them to the YAPs, we're involved in the breaking down of that carcass and packing and labelling it ourselves physically. That's why I'm here today, not Alan. He's he's in the boning room today doing exactly that, and has been for the last 3 days, so we can go to the markets tomorrow. And I think it's the ability for us to talk to people about what cuts of meat are on an animal and how to cook it. It's where did that animal come from? What's its parentage? It's just so many things. I think one of the things I just want to say is I think with buying, people have, to me there's a bit of a misconception about food being expensive from the farmer's market. And we do get that, and I'm not saying that our meat is cheap, but I am saying that there's a whole carcass that's live weight 650 kilos. There's a lot of meat that's not prime cuts, and most of you guys, I'd like to think, you know what the percentage is of prime cuts versus all those other, what we call secondary cuts. And you can actually eat ethical products, and ethical meat particularly, quite easily and cheaply and economically by buying those other cuts. We have meat that starts at $14 a kilo, and admittedly it goes up to, I think it's about $58 odd a kilo. But there just seems, I think there's a bit of that unfortunate misconception, and I think eggs are a bit the same. But the other thing I think we often talk about in markets is that you don't need to eat 400 grams of meat each time you sit down and have something to eat. If you're going to have a bottle of grains, you're not going to have a case of it, you're going to have a bottle, and if you're lucky, you'll share it between 2 of you, but you'll probably end up finding you need to share it between 5 or 6 of you to afford it. So you still get the taste of it, you still know you're doing something good and enjoyable, but not being crazy about it.
Thanks, Lizette. We might chuck it out to the audience. Does anyone have any questions for anyone on the panel? Up the back, Nathan?
Yep, just straight on the Lizette. With your meat, have you done or what you're looking at halal accreditation since, we've got a growing population of Islamic people in Australia? Do you think that that's a market you can do as well?
Sorry, accreditation of?
Halal.
Oh, halal. We are halal accredited. That's simply because the abattoirs that we use kill halal. It's not actually something, we know it, but we don't put it up everywhere for no other reason other than if people want to know, they can ask us and we can tell them. And also I guess that's sort of where it gets into the marketing. I don't want the stall at the market to look like this you know, so many, I mean, A4 brochures of accreditations with certain things. So we don't spruik about it, but we have the information there, and that's simply because we're at the markets, so we can answer that for you if you have a question.
I've worked with a couple of Turkish restaurants, and one of the owners has set up a butchery, which is a halal butchery. And where I live in Collingwood, I've noticed there's a big halal butchery opening there, and there seems to be a big growth in the halal sector. And certainly they've used in the Turkish restaurants because of the Muslim market, talking about halal a lot for their marketing. It seems like growth.
I'm just interested how I guess a big movement has been the organic food movement, and I'm just interested whether, I'm not sure, not directed to anyone in particular, but who's really trying to market themselves as being organic and how important that is in this sort of niche market.
Yeah, look, we get asked that question pretty regularly. But we haven't gone down that track. We try to farm sustainably, and I suppose what we promote is that our milk price is a sustainable price, and so yeah, people sort of relate well to that. But the fact, and I think there's a lot of people realise that this cheap food can't keep going on, and that the farmers still have to get a reasonable return on their investment, and I think it's amazing how many people are out there that honestly believe that.
When we were looking at our property management planning, we thought about organic. In the end, we decided just to try and pitch our property as being a sustainably managed property. We thought that at the scale we're doing it was more practical, and that's the way we decided to go.
And we're not organically certified, pretty much basically because we lease a lot of land. So the logistics and costs involved in certifying somebody else's property is just not practical. We don't feed the cattle anything except in winter the cows and calves usually get hay. Steers tend to get nothing at all. So it's just not practical. We can talk, we don't do anything to the cattle that's would be anti-organic. It's just, you know, who needs more bits to fill in my opinion, but we have enough paperwork and things as it is. So I think, and that's I guess that's our approach, is if people want to know anything like that, we're not sort of marketing ourselves as a massive corporation. So it's either myself or my husband Alan, who's at a stall, that they can ask this information from. So we sort of use ourselves as the, rather than sort of certifications everywhere. And I guess that's the same as the halal as well.
It's quite interesting the number of really good small producers who aren't organic for vegetables or anything, and it's become the device for mass marketers and supermarkets to try and sell something in some ways in a divisive way. And like if I go back to the egg example I keep bringing out, sometimes I found myself with eggs and I'm in the supermarket. Organic free range seems to be, you know, saying it's not organic, it's not really a good husbandry for the animals necessarily.
And I just also think that just saying because that something's organically certified does not necessarily make it a good product. You know, that I think is actually giving the organics industry, I would imagine, some real headaches.
I've worked with organic and biodynamic wines before, and I still do. And it's interesting that because organic has been a big thing in wine, and people were labelling things organic, certified organic, and also with biodynamic, with the certification and that sort of thing. But then I then have come up against resistance to those things, particularly biodynamic. People not trusting it in some way, and you know you can describe how it's you know it's to enrich the land, and you know it's not really about the product, how good the product is or anything like that. Of course, the product's great when you're selling it, but people kind of they see a bit of hoodoo around it and they don't quite trust it. And that is a generalisation. It's certainly not across the board. But I think it's people who are looking for it will find it. But I know that there are certainly some biodynamic wine producers who don't actually put that on their label, and it's something that's known in the industry. So someone like Jasper Hill, for example, in Heathcote, they're a biodynamically farmed winery, and they don't really put it on any of their marketing literature.
Well, you'd find that for the great wines of the world would be organic or bioorganic, but they just don't use it as a selling thing, it's a given.
Yeah.
Our focus has gone into the revegetation and to make sure that the landscape is sustainable into the future. If we had directed our energy towards organics, I don't think we could have achieved the landscape sustainability that we currently have on the property. So that was the decision we took.
On that organics topic, I think all the points you've made are really quite fair. Do you think, from a consumer's perspective, they're starting to be educated about the difference between farming sustainably and potentially using poisons at the appropriate time and place versus it being organic or biodynamic, and they're understanding the difference and therefore the potential long-term benefit of farming sustainably and putting in tree breaks along a creek line for those sorts of things? Do you think that message is starting to get through, and we'll see more farmers farming for choice? So it might be biodynamic for particular reasons for their product, but it's not an advertised item because it's more about sustaining, I hate buzzwords, holistically the whole environment?
I think it's, I'm going to think about this, let someone else answer first.
So now you've thrown off.
It is a story that I like to tell people if I know, about it, because I also work in wine as well as inside it. It is a story that I like to tell buyers. If a wine is sustainably made using sustainable practices, but because there's no certification around farmed using sustainable practices, it does leave it open a little bit, and so it's kind of that disconnect between the farmer and the consumer again. Is that do I, as the person selling the product, do I trust that winery or that farmer that they are farming sustainably? It's just something that they've said to me, and it's through that description of we only spray when we need to, and those sorts of things. I'm telling you, this year, say in 2011, everyone said, we sprayed a lot more than we normally would have because it was a wet season and that sort of thing. But from a consumer's perspective, it's not a huge thing at the moment, but it is. It's always it might be a nice little extra bit on the end of the story. And for me, it's an important thing. As farmers, custodians of the land going into the future with larger populations and those sorts of things, it's something that people should be, farmers should be considering, and consumers should be demanding. But it's then that communication, how you communicate that.
Some of our product goes to the farmers market through the Otway Prime, which operates through the Otways here, and we were approached by that group because they liked what we were doing with our farm in terms of its sustainability. So they come out and we hand-pick lambs out of our larger commercial flock. And so when they go to the farmers market in Torquay and other places and round to restaurants locally, probably even down here at Lorne too, I think it does come down here, that particularly the farmers market, the story is told, and it's told about the sustainability perspective, and results were achieved because he's able to get a premium of his beef and his lamb, which are not organic, but he sells and tells a story about sustainability, gets a repeat customer and builds up a relationship. Of course, that's a niche market. Then when you get out on the broader commercial market, well, it's more difficult to tell that story because where's the trust and where's the that's the challenge.
I guess we need to look at who are the main people who buy the products that farmers make, and 80% of people don't really care, I don't think. That's the problem. They go to Woolworths and Coles. And look, I've worked on farms. I used to work on grain dryers, on drying barley and wheat and stuff. And my current ex-wife's family were dairy farmers in Kyabra and up there. So I'm exposed to this, and I love the idea of bucolic life and small farms. But the reality is, there's giant farms growing wheat and stuff, and we have to live with that. And if you look where your markets are in the future, it's not just probably 20%, 10%, 5% of people who go to the farmers markets. There's China. China now 50% owns, is it Manison Foods, which owns Simon Johnson, it owns Will's Studs Cheese Company as well. And Bright Foods is 50% owned by the Chinese government. The Chinese government is buying up land, food from Australia, because they know they can't sustain feeding their population. Now, do the Chinese care whether you're being sustainable or not? But you have to think for your business, what's going to keep your business and take your view on the environment and where the environment's going, what's going to be sustainable so you can continue to supply. I'm not sure the consumer really cares, but like I said, it's about transparency and honesty. And I think most farms, there are individuals behind it. When I find marketing a small business, people are embarrassed to put themselves up front sometimes. I think it's good to show a face and have a person, and the person to tell what their story is, whichever the angle is, whether you're going for the small, sustainable, or the big mass market.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ed. And as an industry, I think we have to consider when we're looking at how we market our commodity products, that whether we listen to the potentially minority who has strict demands on their product, or we look at what the wider consumer market is doing. We probably have time for one more question.
I've got one if no one else does. Based on just thinking about the export markets, and it's probably a question for each of you. If you were contributing, to take a step outside your own current roles, but contributing to Brand Australia, what would be the one quality that you would each think would have to go in the hat in terms of promoting to those export markets?
I'll put carbon neutral, free range, sustainably produced free range carbon neutral lambs, with the emphasis on carbon neutral, because that's the case with our property. We've done the analysis. I think we are net sequesters of carbon.
Compared to most countries, Australia is actually pretty pristine, I think. Compare it to Europe, the density in England, somewhere like that. Go to Vietnam and see the factories around the rice paddies. So that whole, we actually are relatively chemical-free, GM-free. It's that whole natural thing.
We've actually started sending a bit of milk to China, and I suppose the thing that they're looking at is the fact that Australia is queen of the grain, and that the milk is quite a bit dearer than what it is in China, but they've got trust in the brand, and so we sort of see that market's going to continue to grow. And I think that's certainly the advantage that Australia's got, is it is recognised as queen of the grain.
I would like to see, from a Brand Australia perspective, the technological advancement in Australia. Australia pretty much took clean winemaking to the rest of the world, only 20-something years ago, and Australian winemakers are in huge demand all around the world. So that's from an exporting wine and fermented beverages perspective, that technological expertise.
And I think I'd like to think that in the future it'll be a lot of small producers, not obviously as small as what we are, but relative to the huge factory farms in the US, that would get us over the line in terms of small family farms that might have a couple of thousand people, rather than tens of thousands.
Thanks very much for all your answers to the questions. I thought we had a great response from all of you from very different backgrounds. But I think we can all agree that all of you seem to have a lot of confidence in the way way that farming productions operate in Australia, and that we do have a lot of positive stories to tell to our consumers. How we get there with those messages, we can obviously learn from a few examples of more closer relationship, but then I think we have to have a really good think about how we translate that into more of a bigger message across commodities and as an agriculture industry as a whole. So thanks very much all of you for coming and giving your time today. Everyone thought it was great, and I'd just like to offer you a small contribution as